Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has urged other European leaders to step up their nation's own defenses and coordinate those efforts with the rest of Europe. He told the World Economic Forum in Davos that shift will require beefing up military spending, especially now that Europe may not be able to rely on support from America's new president. Zelensky suggested the U.S.-European security relationship wasn't seen the same way on both sides of the Atlantic.
In times of war, everyone worries, will the United States stay with them? And every ally worry about that. But does anyone in the United States worry that Europe might abandon them someday, might stop being their ally? The answer is no. Washington does not believe Europe can bring them something that is really substantial.
Our correspondent Ben Fazulin joins us now from Davos. Ben, a rather extraordinary approach from Zelensky. His speech was aimed at those attending, of course, but also those watching from a distance.
Exactly. Instead of coming here to Davos and pleading, getting down on his knees like he did other years, and asking for more weapons from Europe, he came to Davos this time provoking Europe, flipping around the way people think and telling Europe to start thinking about how it could stop a war rather than putting all the onus on the US. He said he would like to talk about Europe and that who's watching Europe with all eyes on Washington? How does Trump plan to stop the war? What about Europe? And Europe needs to know how to defend itself to start that ball rolling. He said it needs its own version of Iron Dome, referring to Israel's state-of-the-art top-class defense systems. He also said Europe needs a united EU defense policy, and that although the US is the military biggest military supporter for Ukraine, I do have to point out, of course, that Europe is the biggest financial supporter. So he is just provoking Europe here, but trying to get Europeans to think a little differently.
And in his provocation, also doing it as a sort of as a way of advising. Are Europeans ready to receive advice from the Ukrainian president?
I think Europeans need to be open to that advice. I mean, he is a leader with a lot more experience when it comes to fighting off an onslaught like the Russians. For example, he listed the 800,000 soldiers that he has that have experience in fighting a war, many more soldiers than what France has or Germany. He also mentioned the unique drones that Ukraine is building at the moment and the ammunition that it's producing much cheaper than many countries. So the question is not just whether or not Europe can protect itself, but Europe looking towards Ukraine for protection as well. He says Ukraine is in a very good position to do just that.
You know, he wasn't only focused on defense and security and containment of Vladimir Putin, but also technology and European regulations. What did he say about non-defense issues?
He said that the world will move ahead without Europe if Europe doesn't establish itself as a global player. He said Europe needs to catch up on technology. It needs to cooperate on a lot more things, not just defense, as you mentioned, but also technology and competition.
Ben Fazulin, right there at Davos. Many, many thanks.
All right, you've been listening live there to Volodymyr Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, speaking at the World Economic Forum in Davos there. Andrew Hillier listening to that full speech there by Zelensky. So just give us, Andy, what you'd say his main takeaways were.
Well, Majid, that speech was a rallying call for Europe, a wake-up call for Europe, if ever there was one, a day after the inauguration of Donald Trump as US president. And he started the speech by saying that yesterday all eyes were on Washington, and he ended the speech just there by saying that in the future, why can't all eyes be on Europe? This was a speech very much geared towards the European leaders who were present in that room. He said, everyone worries whether or not the US under Trump will abandon them as an ally. Well, why can't we flip the question? Why can't people ask, well, what happens if the Europeans abandon them? And he said several times, reiterated the point during that speech, that Europeans cannot afford to be second or third in line when it comes to priorities for their allies, such as the US. He said that Europe needs to compete for the top spot. And otherwise, the world, he said, would leave Europe behind. And that, he said, would mean that the world would be a worse off place. He, many times throughout that speech, of course, warned against the threat of Russia. He, of course, reminded Europeans that they are Russia's neighbour and that no ocean separates them from Russia. He reminded Europe of Russia's military capabilities, the 1.5 million troops it can amass compared to Europe. He said that European countries needed to stand with Ukraine against Russia. And then what was very interesting, he talked about these potential upcoming negotiations that may take place under a Trump administration to bring an end to the war in Ukraine. And he said that, hinted that should such talks take place, it's not even sure that under Donald Trump that Europe would have a seat at the table. He suggested that perhaps Trump would be more inclined to give Russia and China a seat at the table and not Europe, despite the fact that Europe, well, aside from being Ukraine's neighbour and giving so much money, that Trump perhaps would dismiss the idea and go over the top of the Europeans when it comes to negotiating an end to the war in Ukraine. So essentially a call for Europe to get its act together in terms of security. And he said that Europe must be able to guarantee its own peace and security. And for that, he said, you need the EU and you need NATO.
And look, the forum he was speaking at there, Andy, is Davos. It's a business forum primarily, but political leaders are there as well. It happens every year. Zelensky spoke at it last year. So I wonder what strikes you as different, perhaps, to his message a year ago.
Well, it was very, very interesting to compare his speech just now with his speech 1 year ago. And the World Forum one year ago, it does indeed feel like quite a different place this morning. Last year, when Volodymyr Zelensky spoke at Davos, he really came out swinging. There was no talk of peace, of negotiations. He said that Vladimir Putin must live to regret the conflict that he started. He said last year that Putin would only respond to military defeat, called him a predator. Last year, Zelensky was criticising countries for urging him not to escalate, telling them that only emboldened Putin. So already last year, we saw Zelensky challenging the idea that peace is possible by freezing the conflict, even with Russia occupying large parts of Ukrainian territory. Zelensky back then very much vehemently opposed to this position, and he still is, for that matter. The reason Zelensky came in person last year to Davos was amid growing concerns in Kyiv that policymakers in the West were growing wary of continuing their military and financial support to Ukraine's war effort. What we're seeing now, I think, is this slow realization from Zelensky that the political reality has completely changed, and he is slowly adapting his position to that new reality, as are European leaders too.
Hey, shalom, shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rakah HaKodash, and double honor to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone. Peace, love, salutations, and blessings to the house of David, which is the elect. And as you just seen, those two clips referencing the speech that Vladimir Zelensky gave at the Davos World Economic Forum meeting. Within, I believe that was either earlier today, if I'm not mistaken, or yesterday. I'm not too sure, but I think it was earlier today. And within that speech, he had directed his focal point toward the European Union, countries, into getting into a mindset that they can no longer be 100% reliant and dependent on America. All right, because they have this because as Trump is getting into office, even in Trump's speech yesterday, he said that he will simply put America first. Right, he will always put America first. And leading up to his inauguration, a lot of the talks that Trump, were speaking, it was even, certain boastful talks against what has been known as American allies, right? He, spoke about putting tariffs on Canada, all right, putting tariffs on European, nations. So these are nations that are historically allies to America, and also that are part of NATO, that now Trump is, speaking in a sense of taxing them, which will, not go so well, with those nations. Now, it just, remains to be seen, whether or not that happens. But the rhetoric, right, and the vibration that is being put out there is that, these European countries, especially, has to start looking out for themselves, right, and being able to defend themselves, without the assistance of America, right? Because as Zelensky had made mention, it's always talks about what if America no longer, is an ally to the European Union. But then he said something, interesting. He said, but nobody ever stops and thinks about what if the European Union is no longer, an ally to America. You see, and that is something that is a prophecy, right? Because as it is written, right, these things, everything that is taking place is all the will of the Lord, okay? And the minds of these kings are in the hand of the Lord, right? Let's pull it up real quick in the book of Proverbs. What is that? Chapter 21, right? Verse 1, it says, the king's heart, meaning his mind, right? A Hebrew word is lab, is in the hand of the Lord. As the rivers of waters, he turneth it whithersoever he will. See? So these nations, right? These kings, these so-called leaders of these nations, they all ultimately are, in the hand of the Lord, right? Actually, in the book of Daniel, let's get that as well. Daniel chapter 4, if I'm not mistaken. Yep, verse 17, it says, this matter is by the decree of the watchers, and the demand by the holy Salaki, and the demand by the word of the holy ones, to the intent that the living may know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and giveth it to whomsoever he will, and set over it the bases of men. See, so Yahweh, right, which is the only true living God, he rules in the kingdoms of men. See, that's why in the book of Daniel, the first chapter, if I'm not mistaken, it tells you that he setteth up kings, and puts down kings, right? Let's see if we can pull that up. No, so like Daniel, the second chapter. Daniel chapter 2, verse 21. It says, start at 20. It says, Daniel answered and said, blessed be the name of God forever and ever. And what is that name? That name is Yahweh, in the name of his son, Yahweh Shai, right? Who the Lord ultimately will set up as the King of kings and Lord of lords over all flesh. All right. Yahweh Shai is the one who the Heavenly Father in due time will put, in authority, because it is Yahweh Shai that will make, the earth profitable, right? As it says in the book of Sirach, that the power of the earth is in the hand of the Lord, and in due time he will set over it one that is profitable. Well, that one is Yahweh Shai. But for now, being in these last moments of the heathenistic rulership, you have Esau. The Lord has put Esau in the position of power on the earth, right? Job 9:24, the earth is given into the hand of the wicked. See, which in Esau rules, right? His coming is after the working of Satan. All right, but Satan's vibration and his rulership, through Esau Edom, it has an end. Okay, that's why it tells us that in the book of 2nd Ezra, the 6th chapter, that Esau is the end of the world. All right, but reading on here, it says, for wisdom and might are his. He changeth the times and seasons. He removeth kings and setteth up kings. He giveth wisdom unto the wise and knowledge to them that know understanding. He revealeth the deep and secret things. He knoweth what is in the darkness, and the light dwelleth with him. Okay, and as it is written in Amos, that the Lord God will do nothing, but he revealeth his secret unto his servants the prophets. And one of those secrets that Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai has revealed unto us is that NATO, right? NATO, which is, according to scriptures, the beast, right? The NATO EU, military power structure. It is going to revolt and go against the whore, which is Babylon the Great. Okay, and now, we're seeing these things taking shape and playing out on the earth, which is why you have, Zelensky speaking the way he is speaking, because the mindset that Trump is coming in to America with is he's putting America above everybody, right? Even their own allies. And he is willing to, make enemies amongst his allies if it means the betterment of America. Okay. And that is why I was watching a little clip of Justin Trudeau, which is the Prime Minister, I believe, of Canada. He said that if Trump, basically follows through with his threat of tariffing, putting tariffs on Canada, then Canada will respond and everything is on the table. See, when you have that type of talk, that's something that enemies say to each other, right? Everything is on the table, meaning that we can retaliate and respond however we feel is necessary. But these are supposed to be allies to America. Okay, when you have Trump talking about that it's possible for him to take America out of NATO, right? That is a pact, right? That's a treaty, right? North Atlantic Treaty Organization that America and these European countries, made with each other. All right. If I'm not mistaken, I believe it was after World War II, if I'm not mistaken. But yet here you have Trump, whose look is more stout than his fellows, is basically boasting and saying we don't need the world needs America, right? America doesn't need allies. Its allies is the ones that need America. And that is why you had Zelensky, stating, what he was stating in that speech, that Europeans now need to start looking after themselves and not being dependent on America to be there, because Trump is talking about stop. He's going to stop giving military aid to Ukraine, right? And America has been the biggest supporter, militarily wise, of Ukraine, and these other European nations depend on America's military and their weaponry to help support Ukraine fight against Russia. But if Trump stops doing that, Russia is not going to automatically just stop going to war, because they have a strategic operation, right, where they deemed it a military operation that they want to accomplish. Okay, but you have these European countries, right? In particular, I believe it was the head of NATO. He basically said that NATO needs to move to a wartime mindset, right? And he was saying how that even if America, stops giving aid to Ukraine, that the NATO, the European countries need to pick up that slack, because they cannot afford, right? They said that Europe cannot afford to let Russia win. But Trump is not saying, see, Trump, he has the mindset of, hey, Europe might not can afford for Russia to win against Russia to win against Ukraine, but America, we're all the way over here, right? They can afford for Ukraine to lose to Russia. So now that is a conflict of interest that is happening between America and Europe, and that divide that wedge is being spread more and more. That divide is becoming more and more apparent. You see, and the thing is, all of these countries, right, America and these NATO countries, majority of them, if not all of them, are Edomite countries. All right, you got Turkey, that falls under the Islamic, religion, and they may be Ishmaelites, but I personally believe a lot of the heads, like Aragon, he might be an Edomite, just might be an Islamic Edomite. Okay, but nonetheless, which Turkey anyways already prophesied to go against America as well, which you see because of the 48ers, the state of the 48ers, that is causing a divide between Turkey and America. So you have that divide happening between them, and then you have this divide that is happening amongst NATO and America. Now, will all of NATO's countries turn on America? Probably not. But the fact that you have this talk and this rhetoric in certain countries in NATO that are looking at America, especially under Trump, as not being so friendly as it once was, is a cause for concern for them, right? So here in the book of Mark, chapter 3, verse 24, Yahushua says, if a kingdom be divided against itself, that kingdom cannot stand. And if a house be divided against itself, that house cannot stand. And if Satan rise up against himself and be divided, he cannot stand, but hath an end. Now what I want to do is read this in the G&T. It says, if a country divides itself into groups which fight each other, that country will fall apart. And you have that division, happening here in Babylon the Great, because it is a melting pot, right? Because you have nations of people from all over the world that are here in America calling themselves Americans, but yet they may be East Indians, they may be so-called Chinese, they may be Africans, right? They may be so-called Hispanic or so-called Black Americans, whatso have you. Okay, and because you have all of these different nations here, that don't share the same values or the same beliefs, or don't even look at their neighbors and see, themselves within their neighbors. That's why you have uproars here. That's why you have so-called racial division or tension here. And that's something that's only going to escalate further, especially now that you have DT back in office. Okay, because a lot of these Edomites are becoming, their pride is heightening. All right, they get into that mindset once again that they are the superior race, and all nations that are here in America needs to recognize and act accordingly unto that. But that spirit is not on Jake how it was back in the 60s to just be docile and afraid of Esau. Okay, and you got a lot of these other nations, Ishmaelite nations, Elamite nations that also have a bone to pick with Esau as well. But reading on, it says, if a family divides itself into groups which fight against each other, that family will fall apart. Now, when you go into the scriptures talks about Esau, right, as a house. I believe in the book of Obadiah, right? It says that the house of Edom shall be for stubble. See? And when you go into Genesis, the 36th chapter, it gives you the generations of Edom. Okay, you have Teman, you have Dedan, you have Amalek, right? Who else you have? Can't think of any others off the top, but nonetheless, all of these various different Edomites nations, right? Like Germany, France, UK, the American Edomite, right? Amalek, they all are Edomites. But here you have it that there is a division that is amongst them. See, even within America's own, because Russia going against America and NATO, those are Edomites fighting each other. See, and then now you got within NATO certain countries like what Zelensky was saying, not being able to rely or depend, on America. That is a family divide, and what ultimately would happen, that family will fall apart. And we have a great example of that happening after the reign of King Solomon, where the kingdom was split between Jeroboam and Rehoboam. And ever since then, our nation has been divided, right? Our nation has been in a disarray, which ultimately was the curses. But the Lord told us that in these latter days that the curses were going to come upon our enemies. So now we're seeing Esau and his house being divided, right? Verse 26. So if Satan's kingdom divides into groups, it cannot last, but will fall apart and come to an end. And that is what we're witnessing. All right. Because Esau rules in the energy of Satan, but yet you have Satan's kingdom dividing against itself. So if Satan's kingdom is dividing against itself, right, the beast is dividing against itself, then it cannot stand, but it has an end. And this is how another sign that we know that we're close to the end, because never before in history was NATO or America talking about, withdrawing from NATO, or European countries talking about depending on themselves and not, depending on America and not relying on America, or maybe possibly not being an ally to America. All of this is ultimately the doing of the Heavenly Father, because as we just read, he deals in the kingdoms of men. So he is maneuvering and setting up the minds, working on the minds of these kings to have them think in this fashion, to ultimately fulfill the prophecy written of in Revelation, the 17th chapter, which reads, Revelation chapter 17, verse, let's go straight to the point, verse 16. It says, and the 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, these shall hate the whore. Okay, and those 10 horns, ultimately represent through splitting of nations and then and other nations being added onto the EU. It basically now represents the I believe it's 23 or 28. I can't remember off the top, but I want to say the 23 member nations of the EU. Okay, but it started off as 10, nations, and those EU nations it says they shall hate the whore. Okay, and why are they going to hate the whore? Because of things like Trump saying, right? American exceptionalism, putting America first, taxing, its own allies, right? Tariffs that they may not be able to economically, weather. So that's going to cause an economic strain on their governments. Trump is saying, we don't give a damn, because at the end of the day, if he's only going to do what's better for America, and if that means shitting on you, and that's how Esau works, man, right? They tells you that in the book of Sirach, that he will only use you, a rich man will only use you, as far as he needs you. And that's what America is basically saying to its own allies, that if you're not paying your share, if we're footing the bill, majority of the bill, and our country is in debt because you're being able to live lavishly off of America, then he's gonna stop that. But to see, the thing about a whore, right? Because that's what the scriptures talks about. The thing about a whore is a whore doesn't get to call the shots, right? A whore doesn't get to say, oh, I'm about to start charging you, a crazy amount. You're a whore. you're a cheap, what do they call it? You're supposed to be a cheap fuck. Excuse my French. But what Trump is saying is not. We're worth more than what you're paying us, right? And that's going to cause what? A dissension. That's going to cause a divide amongst those that have been in confederacy with her. So it says, they shall hate the whore, and shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh and burn her with fire. And how are these nations, right, going to burn this whore with fire? Is by way of what? Those missiles. That's how a nation burns another nation's with fire. It's through these missiles. And you know that this was a future prophecy, because what John the Revelator saw, right, might have been an actual dragon that shoots out fire, right, and burns this whore that was riding upon her. But you're not about to see a 7-headed 10-horned dragon come out of the earth, and then a whore, right, a woman dressed in red is going to, scarlet is going to be riding it, and then all of a sudden is going to turn and look at it, right, like this is a House of Dragons, right, Game of Thrones, and it's going to burn her up. Nah, okay, this was all symbolic, and through the spirit of through the Ruach HaKodesh, the Lord has given the secret unto his servants, the prophets, to be able to break this down and give the sense of it. So this is how we know that America, during this Third World War, also is going to have certain allies that are going to turn against it. And ultimately, why? Because verse 17, it says, for the Most High have put it in their hearts to fulfill his will. See that? He put it in their hearts to fulfill his will. And as the scripture says, who can resist his will, right? Nobody can resist the will of the Lord. So this is Obadiah chapter 1, verse 7. It says, all the men of thy confederacy have brought thee even to the border, right? A lot of these countries that are allied with America is one of the reasons why America has its troops outside of America and spread everywhere else, because they're trying to help these, give aid to these other countries. But you giving aid to other countries is now leaving your nation vulnerable to a some type of attack. So all of the men of that confederacy have brought thee even to the border. The men that were at peace with thee have deceived thee and prevailed against thee. They that eat thy bread have laid a wound under thee. There is none understanding in him. So right here, it lets you know that even men that you were at confederacy, meaning you had allegiance with, right? You had, a treaty with. These are going to be some of the same nations that are going to fight against you and bring you, to the border, meaning bring you to a point of, going to war. You see? So, I just want to touch on that because things that are happening in the news, is showcasing how the words of Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushai are being fulfilled, are being played out right in front of our eyes. So, this is why we always talk about, watching, what's going on in the scripture, in the world, and linking it up to the scriptures, because these are the signs that the Lord gave unto us for us to, measure the time diligently with. Okay, so, with that, Lord willing, this was edifying unto the elect, giving all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushai, Ba'ashem Rakach Kodash. Shalom.
Mm-hmm.